Let us take our stand on Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. God, after he spoke long ago to the fathers in the prophets in many portions and in many ways, in these last days has spoken to us in his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom he also made the world. He is the radiance of his glory and the exact representation of his nature, and upholds all things by the word of his power. When he had made purification of sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as much better than the angels, as he has inherited a more excellent name than they. At the heart of Christian theology, and therefore at the heart of Christian living and ministry, is the conviction that the living God has spoken. At the heart of Christian theology is the conviction that the living God has spoken finally and fully in Jesus Christ, God's only begotten Son. Spoken for God's self. God has spoken for God's self. That is, the living God has revealed who God is and what God is like. The fundamental conviction of Christian theology, of course, is that there is a God. And right on the heels of that conviction is the conviction that this God has graciously and freely opened God's self up for all to know. Why? Why has God spoken? Because the living God wants relationship. The living God wants relationship with the relational creatures the living God has created. Indeed, as we discover when we read the rest of the Bible, the record of God's self-revelation, we were made for a relationship with this God. So God speaks. God tells us who God is and what God is like. As Francis Schaeffer used to say in the 20th century, he is there and he is not silent. In his dialogue with the philosophers in Athens, recorded in the part of the New Testament we call Acts chapter 17, the Apostle Paul makes the bold claim, in him we live and move and have our very being. In God. As Paul is walking through the Areopagus, he's taken by all the signs of the human search for God. He stands in the middle of the spiritual marketplace and says, "People of Athens, I observe that you are very religious in all respects. For while I was passing through and examining the objects of your worship, I also found an altar with the inscription, to an unknown God. Are not such altars present in the cities of our world? Signs of the quest for knowing more than we can know with our unaided senses? To an unknown God." And then Paul says, "What therefore you worship in ignorance, this I proclaim to you." And goes on to speak of a creator who gives life to all and gives breath to all. And then Paul says, in him we live and move and have our being. In God. In God, we live and move and have our being. If this is so, and Christian theology joyfully declares it is, then one of, if not the most important questions we can ever ask is, who is this God in whom we live and move and have our very being? Alfred North Whitehead, one of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century, once said, "The only important question before us today is this: what do you mean by God?" I submit to you that asking this question is the most practical discipline of the Christian life. Read all the how-to books you can get your hands on. Register for all the how-to seminars and workshops you can find. The most practical issue of our lives will still be, who is God and what is God like? Every other dimension of Christian living and service is affected by how we answer that question. I will go even further and submit to you that the quality of every human life is directly related to how she answers that question. Why? As already alluded to, according to the opening chapters of the Bible, according to Genesis 1 to 3, every human being has been created in the image and likeness of whoever God is. That is, each of us has been made to reflect the nature and character of whoever and whatever God is. Which means that we discover who we are when we discover who God is. Let us make humanity in our image, according to our likeness. Who then is this us? Now, one accepts the task of speaking about God in our time and our world with much humility, especially in our pluralistic context. For who am I and who are you to say who God is? How can the finite speak of the infinite, especially when the infinite says, my ways are not your ways and my thoughts are not your thoughts? In the part of the world where I live, in North America, most morning newspapers, whether hard copy or online, have a cartoon section. For many years, most papers carried the Peanuts cartoon by Charles Schulz. One of the chief characters was Snoopy, a precious and precocious dog. He's often given the best lines in the cartoon. One day, he's sitting on top of his doghouse, and he's plunking away at his typewriter. Boy, that dates the cartoon, doesn't it? Snoopy's master, Charlie Brown, a young, gentle-natured boy, comes up to the doghouse and asks Snoopy what he's doing. Writing a book, he says. Charlie Brown says, what is it about? Theology, Snoopy responds. So Charlie asks, what's the title of your book on theology? And Snoopy looks up from his typewriter and says, did it ever occur to you that you might be wrong? Snoopy realizes what we need to take seriously. It is so easy to go astray in our thinking and feeling about God, with problematic consequences in every dimension of our living. We all have the propensity, that's putting it mildly, to create God in our image, in our own image, to imagine a God that fits the way we understand reality, to think up a God who is the projection of the deep longings of the human heart, or worse, the projection of the deep fears of the human heart. The 16th century theologian John Calvin said that the human heart is an idol factory. Thanks a lot, John. Yes, thanks a lot. Warning us. What all this means is that we are totally dependent upon God to answer our question. Only God can tell us who God is. God must open up God's self if we are to know God as God really is. You can make deductions about who I am by the way I speak, by the way I live, by the way I treat other people, by the way I spend money. But unless I open up to you, unless I speak for myself, you do not know the real me. It is true that sometimes actions speak louder than words, but there are parts of us that can only be revealed by speaking for ourselves. Our fondest dreams, our darkest fears, our deepest motives can only be shared in word. And here's the good news. The reality behind the word God has opened up to us. God has let humanity in on God's thoughts and feelings and longings and dreams and motives and plans. And so for many years, the church has sung the great hymn, Be Thou My Vision. Be Thou my vision, O Lord of my heart. Not be all else to me save that Thou art. Don't be anything to me but what you are. Heart of my own heart, whatever befalls, still be my vision, O ruler of all.